Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, as I have been promising for a while, I'm finally going to be reviewing this incredible book which I began reading for a mental health awareness month in May, The Woman They Could Not Silence by Kate Moore. I have a previous video about her previous nonfiction book, also The Radium Girls. I would highly recommend that book as well. So I knew this book was going to be wonderful, even though of course the subject is like infuriating. This woman was not even like mentally ill by the standards of like the modern era. She just had her own mind. She had different opinions from a very controlling, like abusive husband. I'm not going to like do a whole synopsis of the whole book because that would like give away way too many like twists and turns, but she was an incredible, absolutely like amazing woman. She did so much for like, the women who were trapped in these institutions, both women who were sent there on the whims of abusive like husbands, fathers, and other men in their lives, as well as for like women who were like genuinely mentally ill by both the standards of their day and of the current era. And she helped to like pass laws. For example, like when she was in the institution, she didn't know this at the time, but she found out later, oh, that's why I have never been getting mail from all these friends and my oldest sons on the outside who have been promising they would do whatever they possibly could to help me. The director, he was a total like piece of work in himself. He turned out to be like not nearly as like benevolent and like wonderful as she had been led to believe he was. That was all part of his like master plan. He never stopped believing she was insane. He just like led her to believe, oh, I'm your friend Elizabeth. I'm going to help you all. I promised to publish the book I gave you permission to like write. And he was keeping mail from her the entire time and not sending her own mail out to people. It's just like so many horrible things in this era. And I'm read you guys a synopsis on the flyleaf. 1860. As the clash between the states rolls slowly to a boil, Elizabeth Packard, housewife and mother of 6, is facing her own battle. The enemy sits across the table and sleeps in the next room. Her husband of 21 years is plotting against her because he feels increasingly threatened by Elizabeth's intellect, independence, and unwillingness to stifle her own thoughts. So Theophilus makes a plan to put his wife back in her place. One summer morning, he has her committed to an insane asylum, and they live in Illinois. The horrific conditions inside the Illinois State Hospital in Jacksonville, Illinois, are overseen by Dr. Andrew McFarland. I came to hate this guy so much. A man who will prove to be even more dangerous to Elizabeth than her traitorous husband. But most disturbing is that Elizabeth is not the only sane woman confined to the institution. There are many rational women on her ward who tell the same story. They've been committed not because they need medical treatment, but to keep them in line, conveniently labeled crazy, so their voices are ignored. No one is willing to fight for their freedom, and disenfranchised both by gender. That should really say sex. People did not use the word gender as a euphemism for sex in that era. That's like a very late 20th century thing, but rant over. And the stigma of their supposed madness. They cannot possibly fight for themselves. But Elizabeth is about to discover that the merit of losing everything is that you then have nothing to lose. And it just goes on to, oh yeah, a little bit more about it. Best-selling author Kate Moore brings her sparkling narrative voice to The Woman They Could Not Silence. An unputdownable, is that really a word, story about a courageous woman who fought for her own freedom, and in so doing freed millions more. Elizabeth's refusal to be silenced and her ceaseless quest for justice not only challenged the medical science of the day and led to a giant leap forward in human rights, but also showcased the most salutary lesson. Sometimes the greatest heroes we have are those inside ourselves. And so Elizabeth had been conflicting with her husband pretty much from the jump. And it's really ironic. His name was Theophilus. That means like friend of God. He was no friend of God or like even a friend of anybody or like a positive person in any way. You know what they say sometimes when you give people like a virtue name or a name with a very specific meaning, they end up the total opposite of it. For example, faith is an atheist, and like grace is clumsy, and charity is a miser, and Theophilus is like a you-know-what piece of work. But anyway, and so they were having conflicts for a long time that probably started with the big age gap. She never really had liked him, even during their courtship, kind of pretty much ordered by her father. Like she felt, I'm afraid he doesn't really love me, but she dutifully married him as a like a favor to her father. Theophilus had been a longtime colleague of her father, so the big age gap right there. Elizabeth was 22, and Theophilus was 37 when they got married. And I mean, that's, age gaps do happen for like various reasons, like when they're both adults, rock on. But the creepy thing is, like, he met her when she was 10 years old, and because he was a colleague of her father's for so many years, he like watched her growing up. That's so freaking like creepy. And despite what a lot of people think, I know this is kind of getting a little bit off topic, that huge age gap relationships were not the norm for most couples post antiquity. That is like a complete myth and like misunderstanding historically. And apart from a couple of exceptions, for example, Renaissance and medieval Italy, and a little bit in like the Middle Ages and like Eastern Europe and like the Russian Empire and thereabouts, like the American West, when like men were in short supply, women couldn't really have their pick of men close to their age. Most couples besides that, they were about 1 to 6 years apart, and like every so often they might be, like 7 to 10, 12 years apart, but like 15 years apart, that was like an extreme outlier. And people point to like, I don't want to insult these authors, but like, oh, look at these couples in like Jane Austen and Lev Tolstoy novels. These are like 16-year-old girls, and they're marrying men who are in their mid-30s. Well, those were outliers even then. That was not some kind of like everyone is like doing it. And when the husband was much older, as Theophilus was to Elizabeth, it was like almost always because he like had some kind of power over the family, or the father was in his debt. Oh, I'm going to help support you guys financially, or I'm employing your daddy, so you had better marry me, or I promise to lift you out of poverty, like things like that. So this was not a love match like for any reason, and they were like clashing pretty much the whole time. But they found a way to like make it work, I guess, for the sake of the children and the family. People in those days, like divorce was extremely uncommon. That would have like gotten her even more community stigma, but it really started coming to a head over religious matters. Theophilus was a pastor. Like again, like this was no man of God, and he started feeling, oh, I'm going to lead our church towards the old school. I think they were like a congregationalist, and Elizabeth wanted to go with the new school, which like, obviously because of the words, the old school was more conservative, the new school was more liberal. And Theophilus was horrified. Oh, she's leading like Bible study classes and writing all these essays, and these are people in my own church community who are not wanting to go to the old school. They're like rebelling against me and against God. Oh, I'm a cult leader in my own mind, and he couldn't have that. Like it wasn't even like she wanted to join a different denomination of Protestantism. It was basically the same denomination, only she had a more like liberal interpretation and style of like theology and religious worship than he did. And it's like she wasn't even like leaving Protestantism at all for like to become a Catholic or Eastern Orthodox or become a completely non-Christian religion. So like I just, as a non-Protestant, I really don't understand the difference between all these denominations, and this is just like a great example of it. Like he was just getting so bent out of shape, and he started becoming extremely controlling and abusive, like opening her mail, like reading her diary and things she was writing, trying to prevent her from like visiting friends, spreading stories about her all around town. But she did have like many friends, including her, very helpfully, her two oldest sons. They were working so hard on the outside to try to get her out, even when it seemed like she was going to be like stuck in there in the loony bin forever. And her friends had promised to help her, but like she was just shuttled off, and she kind of felt betrayed by them for so many years. Like, why aren't my friends like helping me with the trial or coming to get me? And then she found out, oh, Theophilus, like he was taking advantage of the law, which at that time like favored husbands and men in general. It was the law of coverture, which she also helped to get overturned in the U.S. after she was finally released. That was basically, if you don't know, like everything the wife didn't have anything at all, but like everything in her possession that technically should have been her property and her money that legally belonged to the husband. So if she like earned any money, had any money like left to her by like a rich relative or her parents, her father, because men were the only ones who could legally have bank accounts in those days, like her father left her money in the will or something like that, or maybe she was making a little bit of a little bit of a salary, a paycheck from helping with the family business or something like that. Nope, turn it all over to the husband if he was inclined that way. I mean, I do think some people do kind of overstate it. Now, I definitely do not believe like every single man or almost every single husband, like father, man back in the day was this controlling and abusive. But like, if you were unfortunate enough to get locked into a marriage like this, it was like really sad. And like she couldn't even own her own children legally, which was what Theophilus did. He wanted to like take away custody from her. And I was surprised to find this out. Charles Dickens did this to his wife. He had her like sent away to the workhouse to get like custody of their 10 children. He was trying to marry an 18-year-old, and like so many men did this. They, oh, just get rid of the troublesome uppity wife. I want to marry a hot new model, or I just don't like women anymore. Or I never liked that woman. I just want to be alone. Oh, off to the loony bin on some fabricated excuse. And because the system was like structured to like, prefer men believe their word automatically, they would just like send the wife to the loony bin. And everything she said in her own defense, I'm not crazy, I'm intelligent, look at me, do I behave like a mad woman? That was considered to be like, even further proof of her insanity. Like they called it like a moral insanity. It was just like a whole like horrible system stacked against women all around. And prior, she had been sent to a loony bin when she was 19 years old, and her husband was like, oh, this was horrible, I should have like known better. I was just totally in the wrong. And again, getting back to the couverture, this video is unscripted. If like a woman was mugged and the guy stole her like handbag with her like, a little bit of money or something, or like makeup or whatever, like things that would not really supposed to belong to the husband, he wouldn't have any interest in. Like if the case went to the courts, the mugger would be tried for stealing the husband's pocketbook and the makeup and the money, or like the woman's diary or anything inside that was considered his property, not the woman's property. This was a really like effed up system. And so she was like 19 when she was like committed before. In 1836, on February 6th, she had entered the state lunatic hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts, on the legal orders of her father, Samuel Ware. Like she later reconciled with him. I wouldn't reconcile with any person who did this to me. She'd been right in the midst of her high-flying teaching career. At the time, Elizabeth was the principal of Randolph College in Massachusetts, a first-class school that employed only the best classical educators. The cause of her insanity was reportedly mental labor. That could mean anything, all these euphemisms in the 19th century. She was far from the first woman brought down by the use of her mind. By her use of her mind. In fact, people expected such outcomes. A visitor to an all-female school in 1858 remarked that its teachers were training your girls for the lunatic asylum. Oh no, they're insexing themselves. They become dangerously ill when they use too much of their tiny little brains. While women had proven that they could study on an intellectual level, doctors lamented that the choice made them highly susceptible to derangements of the nervous system. The problem was that when minds of limited capacity to comprehend subjects tried to do so, it ultimately led to mental breakdown. That was what had supposedly happened to Elizabeth. In reality, doctors were policing women who stepped outside society's strictly defined gender spheres, work and intellect for men, home and children for women, and what could be described as a medicalization of female behavior. For similar reasons, one common cause of committal to an asylum in Elizabeth's time was novel reading. Doctors believed that those who indulged in this pernicious habit lived a dreamy kind of existence, so nearly allied to insanity that the slightest exciting cause is sufficient to derange. No wonder Theophilus and his co-pastor had tried to shut down the first public library that opened in Shelburne, Massachusetts. He also moved her away from her home state of Massachusetts to Illinois. That's yet another classic tactic of an abusing and controlling partner. Oh, isolate that person from her family. She only has me to rely on and any friends she might make in the new place, and I will make sure I will try my best to turn the children against her too, and then it'll be perfect setup. It was introducing improper literature, and the preachers did not believe that churchgoers should risk their souls, or indeed their minds. The psychiatrist at Worcester had not only been concerned with Elizabeth's overuse of her brain, however, but also her irregular menstrual cycle, as noted on her admittance form. And goes on to talk about in the 19th century, doctors, they were like obsessed with like women's reproductive systems. They thought like, menstruation somehow made us like loony. Like if we had like dysmenorrhea, like I've been like suffering from since I was 13 years old, 2 years into menstruating. Oh, that must be our fault. We're doing something because a good little woman, she has a perfect pain-free cycle every time. Like cramps are your own fault. Maybe you're reading too much or doing things that are like contrary to nature, like the inferior role women supposedly have been ordained from since time immemorial, whether they were menstruating too much or too little, were pregnant, breastfeeding, infertile, or menopausal. Every single life stage relating to women's sexual organs was deemed saturated with risk. Mothers were encouraged to delay their daughters' periods by making them take cold baths and avoid meat, feather beds, and those ever pernicious novels. As the moment menstruation began, a woman was subject to its uncontrollable forces, which exerted a disastrous effect upon her mind. And you probably are familiar with the idea that it was like a real medical theory for many centuries, even like over 1,000 to 2,000 years or so. Hysteria, everything wrong with a woman is centered in the womb. It's like wandering, or her machine, as they would call it, the body, the fluid that flows through it, it's like stuck and it needs to be like released. Oh, she's not married yet. She's touching herself. I don't know if YouTube will get me in trouble for the word. Like just so many things about women's sexuality and our very bodies, they were believed to be the cause of insanity. And she later talks about like FGM in the US, not just in like, the type of the place of the world we usually think of it as happening. People genuinely believe this would like cure women of alleged like insanity or supposed unfeminine behavior. So they would like chop off women's genitals the way they do in like sub-Saharan Africa and like parts of the Middle East. It's just like a horrible thing. They didn't even like believe like women should be deriving sexual pleasure from the one part of the body that was, it's a uniquely feminine part of the body that was created solely for pleasure. It has no other function, and they would like remove this wonderful organ from so many women. It's just like so like, horrible. Like, and she maintained her father had very needlessly and unkindly placed her in the asylum after she'd become physically sick with brain fever, what modern day doctors believe to be meningitis or encephalitis. Elizabeth reported that the moment she'd recovered from her physical illness and its then standard treatment of venesection, she'd been bled excessively in her view. Her mind recovered as well. And like the entire time Elizabeth was in the mental institution the second time around in Jacksonville, she kept a secret detailed diary. She knew how to write like really, really, really tiny, like with the modern equivalent of like an ultra, 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 extra, extra fine Japanese fountain pen. And she would like hide it inside of her hat and the seams of her clothing, and she got a really detailed diary out of this. And later on, Dr. McFarland gave her permission to openly write a book talking about her experience at the insane asylum. This one was meant for his eyes, and she wanted it to go public. Eventually she published many, many books, but she also began secretly writing a second book detailing all the horrific abuses she witnessed at the asylum. For example, many of the matrons there, they would like hold women like underwater in the bathtub. It depended. They could be either boiling hot or icy cold, and they would hold them under just long enough to make sure they wouldn't drown, then pull them out again, and they would like beat them. This was in the era when people believed, beat the hell out of someone, that'll teach them a lesson, right from wrong. And now we of course have like 50 plus years of psychological research to show corporal punishment and hitting people, it has the exact opposite effect. And in fact, it's very like damaging upon one's brain. That does not correct bad, so-called bad behavior for the right reason. It only teaches people at best, when I do XYZ, that name doesn't like it, so I just won't get caught next time, or I'll try my best not to do that behavior just because I do not want to be hit or beaten or almost dead. And like she was originally on the 7th ward, where she was basically like the queen of all the insane asylum inmates. She had like permission to like come and go as she pleased, like all these like wonderful things. She could eat in the dining hall, walk about freely on the grounds, go into the sewing room, have her own clothes. But after she became too uppity for McFarland, he had her moved into the 8th ward, where there were like legitimately like, dangerous patients, and like so many things were, they were being abused in so many ways. For example, they were barely even bathing these women, not even with like sponge baths. And Elizabeth took the initiative and helped to, start bathing them and getting them nice clothing. And when she was moved to Eighth Ward, her belongings, a few she had been permitted to take with her, were not sent to her. So she basically had to wear like the same few clothes over and over again. It was just like a horrible experience. And right here, these are like, it's a table. Where is it? That thing just went out. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The screen just went out. I hate when the computer blanks on me when I'm in the middle of shooting a video. So anyway, this is like a little table from an old book. These are just some of many. I've seen other like documents. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word of like why women in particular were sent to insane asylums back in the day. Domestic trouble. Oh, maybe that means like fighting with the husband and not accepting mutely, like matter-of-factly, obediently that, oh, I'm a woman, I'm automatically inferior to hubbykins. I should be obeying his every last word, and I don't want him to beat me, though. That's domestic trouble. Religious excitement. That's like one of the main things Elizabeth was charged with. Business anxieties, death of friends, puerperal, hopefully I pronounced that right. That's mostly discontinued these days because of like modern medicine. That was a frequent cause of maternal death, and if not death, very, very serious sickness in the postpartum period, because doctors were not washing their hands back in the day, and midwives also did not like wash their hands, and it just basically spread this horrible disease from woman to woman in that immediate postpartum period. Disappointed love, overexertion, vicious indulgences. That could mean anything. So many of these euphemisms are so vague. Spiritualism, hard study, using too much of the brain, physical injury, change of life, in other words, menopause, sunstroke. That's not insanity at all. This sounds so hilarious by modern standards, though of course it was anything but hilarious for these poor women, like forced to pay the price for like complete ignorance of like psychology. And apparently they did have so-called psychiatrists at the time, but they really knew jack about psychology and the human brain. It was just like pre-modern, like mumbo jumbo. They might have been like living in the ancient world. Intemperance, novel reading, there it goes again, fear, brain fever, which I just mentioned. It's mostly encephalitis, we believe these days, or meningitis, but it was basically, in general, a whole catch-all for so many other types of things believed to be wrong with a woman. Epilepsy, like that's a medical condition, that is not insanity. Paralysis, again, a medical condition, not like literal insanity. Hereditary, unknown. It's just, and these men had so much control over women's lives. And getting back again to coiffure, when Elizabeth went to the asylum, not only did her actual children belong to her husband, if she divorced him after she finally got out, she would almost certainly have lost custody of them. Women only gained custody, either like full or partial, in extreme circumstances. Back in the day, despite how MRAs these days complain, oh, women always get custody and men are shafted. To just look at history, dude, like for all of human history, pretty much, like a divorced woman lost custody of her children, and now you want to complain because men are not automatically always given complete custody of children, even if they're like abusive. And most judges do not award full custody to only one parent. It's usually shared. There's like a damn good reason these days if an abusive father does not get custody of his children. And even abusive fathers, unfortunately, as we've seen so many cases with tragic outcomes, they often do get enforced shared custody, even when there's like proof he's a danger to the children. But anyway, like she did not have any like identity outside of her husband. This was an era when women were legally and socially like written out of existence the moment they married. Mrs. Husband's full name, or the former Jane Smith, or if she was still like unmarried, she would have to have a male escort in parentheses after her name, like Jane Smith, like the daughter of John Smith or something like that, or the brother of like Robert Smith, or like her uncle or her grandfather, or whoever, maybe her like grown son if she was a widow living alone or something like that. So it was just like a horrible like situation all around. But Elizabeth really did do so much to try to help to improve the lives of these women left behind. And she did, when she did finally eventually get out, she was very instrumental in helping to pass laws. And I opened right to a page. These are like straitjackets. These were some of the instruments used to control so-called unruly patients. When they were originally introduced back in the day, they were genuinely believed to be like humane treatment for patients. Oh, it calms them down and they hug themselves, and we don't have to use like chains and rope that dig into their wrists. But over time it soon became like an extremely overused tactic, and it was very much abused by the staff. Like almost none of these staff had actual like training. Well, I mean, it was the 19th century, so it was pre-modern by default, modern standards, but like they just still had no training even by the standards of their own era. How do I humanely care for people who have like mental illness, or even who are not mentally ill at all? They're just in this place because like a vindictive husband like put her in there, and she made a lot of friends, and she advocated for, you know, them on the outside, and she like wrote her books. Like McFarland was shocked when he eventually wrote them. He did not get what was coming to him in this lifetime. Fortunately, he like met a very, you know, upsetting, well, not really upsetting, it couldn't have happened to a nicer person, but when he finally like left this moral coil, he was still like, you know, praised. People lauded his reputation. He was getting like places named after him. It was just like he was a bad person. I'm sorry if this is totally unscripted. And she eventually like tricked people into putting her on trial for insanity. She had tried to do this back in 1860, but it was not allowed because, oh, you're just the woman and the husband has the final say. This is all of couverture. You have no legal rights as a woman. You're basically a second-class citizen. In fact, you technically don't even exist in the eyes of the law. So she like found an ingenious way, I'm not going to spoil it, to, you know, have a trial for like, you know, habeas corpus turned into a trial, like judging on her mental insanity or non-insanity. Like Theophilus, he was like, what's going on? And like so many twists and turns. He was like a horrible, you know, person to the end. But, you know, they never divorced because like under the era, she would have like lost custody of her children automatically if they had divorced. So there were just so many things I loved about this book. It was like so engrossing. I, you know, couldn't put it down. I might even get a copy eventually for my own self. And like her only daughter Libby, that's presumably the Elizabeth Jr. Libby is a very old-fashioned nickname for Elizabeth. Like she had problems with mental instability as well. It was probably caused, and the author suspects, like even at that time they might have realized, when you lose your like mother at a very young age like she did, and she was forcibly like parentified, forced to shoulder the burden of the whole house, plus like living under like her abusive father, like doing all these like domestic tasks like way beyond like a preteen girl should do. That like really causes like the mind to rewire. Like we know trauma and stress, they can like rewire the brain, particularly when they happen at a young age, when the brain is still so malleable, and it just, you know, changes us forever. But we know so much more today about, you know, trauma and psychological conditions and stuff like that. I'll just pull up her picture at the end. And they also had like an interview with the writer and some like reading group questions. That's a really trendy thing these days. This is picture of Elizabeth. She really deserved so much more. And like even like after her death until fairly recently, people, they seem to like write her down the memory hole. Oh, she really didn't have anything to do with those laws. Like what laws she passed, we don't know about that. She was just Mrs. Packard, the nut who was like a religious like fanatic, and she was doing all these unwomanly things. But thankfully now her reputation has been restored to what it deserves. So thank you guys very much for watching all the way through to the end. I'm sorry if this video was a bit on the long side, but it's a really, really good book. And again, I would really, really highly recommend this. I'm looking forward to seeing the future books Ms. Moore may write. She is really, really good at nonfiction, and particularly at restoring stories of the past, horrifying stories, tragic chapters in history to the public eye that we just didn't really know about. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.